Have you ever caught yourself staring at the night sky, wondering what happens when life as we know it comes to an end? It's a question that can creep up on us unexpectedly, during a quiet moment alone, or after the loss of someone we care about. Does death mean the end of everything? Or is it just the beginning of something we can't yet understand? And what about the idea of a soul? Do we even have one? These thoughts can be unsettling, even a little scary. But they are also deeply human. For thousands of years, people have turned to religion, philosophy, and science to find answers to this question. But today, we're turning to one of the world's oldest spiritual traditions, Buddhism. And here's the thing, what Buddhism has to say about death isn't just a theory. It's practical, logical, and for many, incredibly comforting. Buddhism doesn't see death as a full stop. Instead, it views it as part of a cycle, a continuation rather than an end. But before we get into what happens after death, we need to pause and ask ourselves, what exactly is death? Is it just the moment our heart stops beating? Or is there something deeper happening beneath the surface? In Buddhism, death isn't about disappearing. It's about change. Just like the seasons shift from spring to summer, our existence transitions too. The body may stop working, but according to Buddhist teachings, the mind, or consciousness, keeps going. And what happens next depends on something you might have already heard of, karma. But don't worry, we're not talking about instant payback or dramatic punishments. Karma in Buddhism is much more nuanced than that. Now, I know what you might be thinking. If consciousness survives, does that mean we have a soul? And if we do, where does it go? That's where Buddhism gets really interesting, and it's probably not what you expect. Rather than imagining a soul as a fixed, unchanging thing, Buddhism describes it more like a river, always flowing, never the same from one moment to the next. And this idea might change the way you see not just death, but life itself. But here's the twist. Buddhism doesn't stop at explaining what happens after we die. It also tells us how we can shape that journey, whether we come back in another form, rise to a heavenly realm, or even break free from the cycle altogether. Our choices and actions right now play a huge role. And the idea that we have that kind of influence, it's empowering. So in this video, we're going to unpack all of it. What death means in Buddhism, whether we have a soul, how karma decides what happens next, and the ultimate goal, reaching Nirvana, where suffering ends completely. Stick around because by the end of this video, you might just see life and death in a whole new light. Death is something that touches all of us, yet it's one of the greatest mysteries of life. What does it mean to die? Is it just the end of everything we know, or is it something more? Buddhism offers an answer that might feel both surprising and deeply reassuring. In Buddhist teachings, death isn't viewed as a final curtain call. Instead, it's seen as a transition, one stage of an ongoing process. To understand this, we first need to take a closer look at how Buddhism defines life and the mind itself. Let's start with the basics. Buddhism teaches that what we think of as a self isn't permanent. It's not a fixed entity, like a solid object you can point to and say, "This is me." Instead, it's more like a constantly flowing river, always changing, always moving. Our thoughts, feelings, and experiences are part of that flow. And when we die, it's not the river that stops. It's just the current shifting into another direction. Think of it this way. Imagine a candle lighting another candle. The flame moves from one wick to another, but it's not exactly the same flame. It's connected, yet distinct. That's how Buddhism describes the continuity of consciousness. When the body stops working, the mind carries on, but it doesn't carry on as a soul in the traditional sense. It carries on as a stream of energy shaped by karma. Now, let's talk about karma. In Buddhism, karma isn't about punishment or reward. It's not some cosmic scoreboard keeping track of our good and bad deeds. Instead, karma is simply the natural law of cause and effect. Every action we take, whether it's something we do, say, or even think, plants a seed. Over time, Those seeds grow, and they influence what happens next in our lives. And according to Buddhism, this process doesn't stop at death. The karma we've built up in this life carries over into the next. But what does that mean for the moment of death itself? According to Buddhist teachings, the time of death is a powerful and delicate moment. It's a time when the mind becomes highly sensitive, almost like a mirror reflecting everything we've experienced and felt. This is why Buddhists emphasize the importance of dying with a peaceful, clear mind. The state of our mind at the time of death can have a big impact on what comes next. For example, if someone passes away with feelings of anger, fear, or regret, those emotions can shape the next stage of their journey. On the other hand, if someone dies with a sense of peace, love, and acceptance, that positivity can guide them toward a better rebirth, or even closer to enlightenment. It's worth pausing here to ask, what does this tell us about how we should live? Buddhism teaches that preparing for death isn't something we do at the end of life. It's something we practice every single day. By being mindful of our actions, cultivating compassion, and letting go of attachment, we're not just improving our lives right now, we're also influencing the path that follows. And this brings us to another fascinating aspect of Buddhist thought, the intermediate state, or Bardo. In Tibetan Buddhism, the Bardo is a transitional state between death and rebirth. It's believed to last for 49 days, during which the mind experiences visions, lights, and even encounters with beings shaped by its karma. Some describe it as a dreamlike state, where the mind processes its past experiences and prepares for its next form. The teachings emphasize that what we encounter during this time is a reflection of our own mental states, fears, and desires. For Buddhists, this idea serves as both a comfort and a warning. It reminds us that we are the architects of our destiny, even after death. It also highlights the importance of rituals and prayers offered by loved ones, which are believed to guide the departed soul through the Bardo and help it find peace. But let's take this one step further. If the mind continues, shaped by karma, what exactly does rebirth look like? Buddhism describes 6 realms of existence: heavenly beings, humans, animals, hungry ghosts, demons, and hell beings. Each realm represents a different state of existence, reflecting the consequences of past actions. Rebirth into a higher realm might bring joy and comfort, while a lower realm might involve suffering and struggle. And yet, even the heavenly realms aren't permanent. Buddhism teaches that no matter where we are reborn, we're still part of the cycle of samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. This cycle is driven by craving and ignorance, which keep us attached to illusions of permanence and identity. So what does this all mean in practical terms? It means that the way we live right now matters. Every thought, every action, and every intention is shaping not just this life but the ones that follow. It's like building a foundation for a house. The stronger and more stable it is, the better it will hold up in the future. But let's be honest, this idea of continuous rebirth can be a lot to wrap our heads around. Does it mean we're stuck in an endless loop, living life after life without ever breaking free? Not necessarily. Buddhism also offers a path to freedom, which we'll dive into later. For now, the key takeaway is this: death isn't the end. It's just another step in the journey. And that brings us to the next big question. If death isn't the end, what exactly happens next? How does karma decide where we go? And what about people who claim to remember past lives? We'll get into all of that in the next section. Does Buddhism believe in a soul? To answer this question, we need to start by challenging a common assumption, the belief that we have a fixed, unchanging soul. This idea of an eternal soul is something many of us have grown up hearing, whether through religion, culture, or personal reflection. It's comforting to think there's a part of us that never dies, that continues on exactly as we are now. But Buddhism offers a completely different perspective, one that might sound unsettling at first, but ultimately opens the door to profound freedom and understanding. Buddhism teaches that there is no permanent, unchanging soul. Instead, It describes human existence as a collection of ever-changing components called the five aggregates, or skandhas. These aggregates include form, our physical body, sensation, feelings we experience, perception, how we interpret the world, mental formations, thoughts, intentions, and habits, and consciousness, awareness itself. Together, these elements create the sense of self that we experience. But here's the twist: none of these components are fixed. They are constantly shifting, like waves in the ocean. Think about it this way. The person you were 5 years ago isn't the same as the person you are today. Your thoughts have changed, your body has changed, and your experiences have shaped you in ways you might not even realize. Buddhism calls this idea anatta, or not self. It means that what we think of as our identity is really just a temporary combination of elements held together by cause and effect. Now, you might be wondering, if there's no permanent soul, then what carries on after death? This is where Buddhism introduces the concept of consciousness continuity. Imagine a stream flowing down a mountain. The water in the stream is never the same from one moment to the next, yet the stream continues. In the same way, consciousness carries on after death, shaped by the karma we've accumulated in this life. This idea can feel abstract, so let's break it down further. When we act, speak, or even think, we create mental impressions, like ripples in water. These impressions don't just disappear. Instead, they form patterns that influence what happens next, both in this life and beyond. So, while there's no permanent soul moving from one life to the next, there is a continuity of mental energy, an echo of the choices we've made. To understand this more deeply, let's take an example. Imagine someone who has spent their life practicing kindness and generosity. The mental habits they've developed, like compassion and patience, don't vanish at death. Instead, these qualities leave an imprint, influencing their consciousness as it transitions into a new existence. Likewise, someone who has cultivated anger or greed might find their next experience shaped by those patterns. It's like planting seeds. What grows depends entirely on what's been planted. But what does this mean for how we live? If our actions leave lasting impressions, then every decision matters. It's not about being judged by an external force. It's about understanding that we are constantly shaping our own future through the seeds we plant in our minds. This is why Buddhists focus so much on mindfulness, compassion, and ethical living. It's not just for this life, but for all the lives that may follow. This concept of non-self might sound unsettling at first, but it can also be liberating. If we're not tied to a fixed identity, it means we're not bound by our past mistakes or limitations. We have the power to change, to grow, and to create a better path forward. It also means we don't need to cling so tightly to our sense of self, which is often the source of anxiety and suffering. And this freedom isn't just philosophical, it's practical. Imagine the relief of knowing that your mistakes don't define you forever. Buddhism teaches that transformation is always possible, and that's an incredibly empowering idea. The habits and patterns we've developed can be reshaped, and through mindfulness and meditation, we can gradually let go of harmful tendencies and nurture positive ones. Let's take this one step further. If there's no permanent soul, what happens at the moment of death? According to Buddhism, the mind enters a transitional phase, influenced by the karma it has accumulated. This phase determines what form the consciousness will take next, whether as a human, an animal, or even in one of the higher or lower realms of existence. The process isn't random. It's guided by cause and effect. And what happens during this transitional phase? In Tibetan Buddhism, this phase is called the bardo, a state between death and rebirth. It's believed to last for up to 49 days, during which the consciousness undergoes different experiences, shaped by its past actions and mental habits. Some describe the bardo as dreamlike, filled with visions and encounters that reflect the mind state. For example, someone who has lived a virtuous life might experience peaceful and pleasant visions, while someone who has acted out of fear or anger might face more challenging ones. This idea of the Bardo highlights the importance of mental preparation. Many Buddhist traditions include practices designed to help individuals face death with clarity and calmness. Meditation, chanting, and reciting prayers are all tools used to ease this transition, both for the dying and for loved ones left behind. In fact, family members often perform rituals to assist the deceased, helping guide their consciousness toward a peaceful rebirth. But what about enlightenment? Does this mean we're stuck in an endless cycle of rebirth? Not necessarily. Buddhism also offers a path to freedom, Nirvana. Nirvana is a state of being free from craving, attachment, and suffering. It's not about escaping existence, but about seeing reality clearly and letting go of illusions. Once we achieve Nirvana, the cycle of birth and death comes to an end. Reaching Nirvana isn't something that happens overnight. It's a gradual process, requiring dedication, self-reflection, and practice. But the promise of freedom from suffering, both in this life and beyond, makes it a path worth walking. And the best part? Every small step we take toward mindfulness, compassion, and understanding brings us closer to that ultimate peace. So, to sum it up, Buddhism doesn't believe in a soul as an eternal, unchanging essence. Instead, it views life as a dynamic process, always in motion. What continues after death is not a fixed self, but the energy and impressions we leave behind. And while this might seem unfamiliar, it's also a reminder that we're not trapped by who we are today. We're free to shape our future, moment by moment. What determines where we go after death? This is perhaps one of the most profound questions that humans have pondered since the beginning of time. For Buddhists, the answer lies in the teachings of karma and the cycle of rebirth, known as samsara. According to Buddhism, what happens after death isn't left to chance or decided by a higher power. It's shaped by our actions, intentions, and mental states during our lifetime. Let's dive deeper into this fascinating concept. At the heart of Buddhism's view on the afterlife is the idea of karma. Karma is often misunderstood as a simplistic system of rewards and punishments, but in reality, it's much more complex and nuanced. In Buddhism, karma refers to the natural law of cause and effect. Every action, whether it's a thought, word, or deed, plants a seed in the mind. These seeds eventually ripen, influencing our experiences in this life and the next. Think of karma as a field. The actions we take are like planting seeds in this field. Positive actions, such as acts of kindness, compassion, and generosity, plant seeds that lead to pleasant outcomes. Negative actions, such as anger, greed, and hatred, plant seeds that lead to suffering. Over time, these seeds sprout and shape our future experiences. And this process doesn't end at death. It continues into the next life. So, how does karma determine where we go after death? When we die, our consciousness doesn't just vanish. Instead, it enters a transitional state called the Bardo in Tibetan Buddhism. During this time, the mind undergoes various experiences, influenced by the karma we've accumulated. These experiences can be peaceful or terrifying, depending on the patterns we've created throughout our lives. For example, someone who has lived a life filled with compassion and mindfulness might experience calm and reassuring visions in the Bardo. These positive mental states can lead to a favorable rebirth, perhaps as a human with good fortune or even as a being in one of the heavenly realms. On the other hand, someone who has acted out of anger, greed, or ignorance may face distressing visions that reflect their unresolved fears and attachments. This can lead to rebirth in one of the lower realms, such as the realm of animals, hungry ghosts, or even hellish realms where suffering is intense. But it's not all predetermined. Buddhism teaches that the state of mind at the moment of death plays a crucial role. This is why many Buddhists practice meditation, chanting, and mindfulness throughout their lives, to prepare for death with clarity and peace. In fact, some Buddhist traditions emphasize specific rituals and prayers to guide the consciousness of the deceased through the Bardo and help them achieve a better rebirth. One of the most well-known teachings on this subject comes from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, This ancient text provides detailed instructions on how to navigate the bardo and recognize its illusions. It encourages a dying person to let go of fear, attachments, and regrets, focusing instead on enlightenment and liberation. For Buddhists, this process isn't about clinging to life or fearing death. It's about embracing the transition as an opportunity for spiritual growth. This transitional period, however, is not uniform for everyone. Some traditions describe it as a highly subjective experience, influenced by our deepest fears, desires, and attachments. It's like a dream state, fluid and shaped by the mind's own creations. What we perceive during this phase mirrors our subconscious tendencies and emotional imprints. This raises another question. Is it possible to change our trajectory even after death? Interestingly, Buddhist teachings suggest that the prayers, chants, and rituals performed by the living can influence the experience of the deceased in the bardo. Monks often recite specific prayers to guide the consciousness toward peace and higher rebirths, acting as a kind of spiritual assistance for the soul's journey. But what about breaking free from this cycle entirely? The ultimate goal in Buddhism isn't just to achieve a better rebirth, it's to transcend the cycle of samsara altogether. This is where Nirvana comes into focus. Nirvana represents complete liberation from desire, attachment, and ignorance, the root causes of suffering. It's a state of profound peace, beyond the endless cycles of birth and death. Achieving Nirvana, however, is no small task. It requires a lifetime, or sometimes many lifetimes, of mindfulness, meditation, and ethical living. The process involves cultivating wisdom to see through illusions, detaching from worldly cravings, and developing compassion for all beings. It's not an escape but a deep realization of reality as it truly is. For those who are not yet ready for nirvana, Buddhism encourages focusing on creating good karma and reducing harmful tendencies. By planting seeds of kindness, generosity, and patience, individuals can ensure a smoother path in future rebirths. This gradual improvement helps prepare the mind for eventual enlightenment. Let's expand this idea with a metaphor. Imagine life as a garden. Each action, thought, and intention is like planting a seed. Some seeds grow into flowers, while others grow into weeds. When we die, we carry the results of that garden into the next life. If we've tended to it with care, watering the flowers and removing the weeds, we're more likely to find ourselves in a beautiful new garden. But if we've neglected it, allowing harmful habits to grow, we may find ourselves in more challenging circumstances. This is why mindfulness and self-awareness are so central to Buddhist practice. They allow us to monitor the seeds we're planting, ensuring we're creating the conditions for peace and happiness, both now and in the future. It's also worth noting that karma isn't a rigid framework. While past actions shape our tendencies, Buddhism emphasizes that transformation is always possible. Every moment provides a chance to create new karma and reshape our path. This flexibility gives Buddhists both hope and responsibility, reminding us that we're the architects of our own destiny. So, to sum up, where we go after death is not random. It's a result of our actions and mental states. Karma acts like a guiding force, shaping our experiences in the bardo and influencing our next form of existence. But Buddhism doesn't stop at explaining this process. It also provides a path to freedom. Through mindfulness, ethical living, and meditation, we can take control of our karma, prepare for death, and even break free from the cycle of rebirth to reach nirvana. In the next section, we'll explore the fascinating idea of rebirth and examine real-life stories of people who claim to remember their past lives. Could these stories be evidence of karma and rebirth? The idea of rebirth may seem abstract or even mythical to some, but in Buddhist traditions, it is not just a philosophical concept, it's a lived reality. Stories of individuals recalling past lives have been documented across cultures and histories, often sparking curiosity and debate. These accounts provide compelling anecdotes that reinforce the Buddhist belief in samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. One of the most well-known cases of rebirth comes from the life of the Dalai Lama. The current Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, is regarded as the 14th incarnation in a line of spiritual leaders. According to Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the Dalai Lama is believed to be the reincarnation of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. When a Dalai Lama passes away, monks search for signs and clues to identify the next reincarnation. These signs may include visions, dreams, or symbolic occurrences that point to the location of the child who carries the essence of the previous Dalai Lama. The selection process often involves testing the child to see if they can recognize items that belong to the previous Dalai Lama. Remarkably, many children have shown an uncanny ability to identify objects and demonstrate knowledge that they could not have acquired in their current lifetime. Such stories continue to inspire belief in the Buddhist understanding of rebirth. Beyond Tibet, cases of past life memories have also emerged in other parts of the world. Take, for example, the case of a young boy named James Leininger in the United States. At the age of 2, James began having nightmares about being trapped in a burning plane. Over time, he described vivid details about being a World War II pilot, including the type of plane he flew and the names of his fellow soldiers. His parents were initially skeptical but later discovered that the details matched the life of a pilot named James Huston, who died in combat. In another case, a young girl in India named Shanti Devi astounded her family by recounting memories of her past life in a different town. She claimed to remember her previous husband, their home, and even the circumstances of her death. Investigators verified many of the details she provided, leading to widespread attention and studies by researchers. Buddhists interpret these stories as evidence of the continuity of consciousness. While skeptics may attribute such cases to coincidence, imagination, or suggestibility, Buddhists see them as glimpses into the workings of karma and rebirth. The ability to recall past lives is often seen as a sign of spiritual maturity or a reminder of unfinished karma that needs to be resolved. In Buddhist teachings, past life memories are not viewed as mere curiosities but as opportunities for growth and learning. They serve as reminders that the choices we make in one life can ripple into the next, reinforcing the importance of living mindfully and ethically. It's also worth noting that not everyone retains memories of their past lives. In fact, Buddhism suggests that most people's memories fade as they transition through the bardo and into a new existence. However, practices like meditation and mindfulness can sometimes help individuals reconnect with traces of their past, offering insights into their karmic patterns. Modern science has begun to explore these phenomena as well. Researchers like Dr. Ian Stevenson spent decades studying cases of children who claim to remember past lives. His work documented thousands of such cases, noting patterns and details that defied conventional explanations. While science has yet to provide definitive answers, these studies continue to intrigue both believers and skeptics. More recently, advancements in neuroscience have prompted researchers to explore whether consciousness could exist independently of the brain, further fueling interest in the idea of rebirth. Some scientists propose theories about quantum consciousness that align, at least conceptually, with Buddhist perspectives on the continuity of awareness. So, what do these stories teach us? For Buddhists, they highlight the power of karma and the fluid nature of identity. They remind us that life is not a linear journey but a series of interconnected experiences shaped by cause and effect. Whether we accept these stories as literal truth or symbolic metaphors, they offer valuable lessons. They invite us to reflect on the choices we make, the impact we have on others, and the legacy we leave behind. More importantly, they challenge us to consider what we would do differently if we truly believed that our actions today could shape not just this life but the lives to come. Such reflections often lead practitioners to rededicate themselves to ethical living, mindful actions, and compassionate choices. The idea of rebirth becomes not just a belief about the future, but a guide for living fully in the present. In the next section, we'll explore the ultimate goal in Buddhism, breaking free from this cycle of rebirth and achieving Nirvana. Stay tuned for a deeper look at what it means to reach enlightenment and how it changes everything. In Buddhism, Nirvana represents the ultimate state of freedom, freedom from suffering, freedom from desires, and most importantly, freedom from the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth known as samsara. But what does nirvana really mean? Is it a place, a state of mind, or is it something entirely beyond human comprehension? Let's take a closer look at this profound concept and what it means for those who seek it. Nirvana is often described as the end of suffering. In Pali, the language of the earliest Buddhist texts, the word nibbana literally means blowing out or extinguishing. But what is being extinguished? According to Buddhist teachings, it is the extinguishing of three fundamental causes of suffering: desire, aversion, and ignorance. These are known as the three poisons, and they fuel the cycle of samsara by keeping us attached to cravings, fears, and illusions. Imagine being caught in a fire. The flames represent our desires, our cravings for pleasure, material wealth, and emotional attachments. The smoke represents aversion, the anger, hatred, and resistance to pain. The heat represents ignorance, the illusions that keep us trapped in this endless cycle. Nirvana is stepping out of the fire entirely, no longer burned by it. But what does stepping out of the fire truly feel like? It's not just the absence of suffering. It's the presence of profound peace, clarity, and understanding. It's a state where the mind is no longer disturbed by cravings or fears, and instead experiences freedom from emotional turbulence. Imagine standing on a mountain peak, looking out at the vastness of the world below, yet feeling no need to possess any of it. That sense of release and detachment mirrors what nirvana offers. Reaching nirvana doesn't mean becoming emotionally numb or indifferent to life. Instead, it means experiencing life fully, but without clinging to it. Imagine walking through a garden filled with beautiful flowers. You can enjoy their fragrance, appreciate their beauty, and feel gratitude for their presence. But you don't feel the need to pluck them or own them. This is the essence of non-attachment, one of the core qualities cultivated on the path to nirvana. The path to nirvana is often referred to as the Noble Eightfold Path, and it serves as a guide for transforming the mind and heart. It emphasizes right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Together, these practices form a roadmap for ethical living, mental discipline, and wisdom. For example, practicing right mindfulness means being fully aware of the present moment, whether you're eating, walking, or meditating. This awareness helps you see things as they truly are, rather than through the lens of desire or fear. Right speech encourages us to speak truthfully and compassionately, reducing harm caused by lies or harsh words. These practices gradually dissolve the three poisons, paving the way toward nirvana. But nirvana isn't achieved overnight. It's often described as a gradual process, like polishing a mirror until it reflects perfectly. Each moment of mindfulness, every act of compassion, and each step toward letting go of attachments is like removing a layer of dust from that mirror, revealing the clarity beneath. One of the most powerful aspects of nirvana is that it's not limited to monks or spiritual teachers. Anyone, regardless of background, can begin walking the path. The Buddha himself emphasized this when he said, "Be a light unto yourself." This teaching reminds us that the journey to nirvana is personal and requires inner work. Teachers and scriptures can offer guidance, but ultimately, the effort must come from within. And while nirvana is often seen as the end goal, Buddhism also recognizes the value of smaller steps along the way. Each act of kindness, moment of mindfulness, or effort to let go of anger brings us closer to that state of freedom. Even if nirvana feels distant, the transformation begins in the present. Some might ask, does nirvana mean disappearing completely? In Theravada Buddhism, nirvana represents the end of individual existence as we know it. It's a state beyond birth and death, where the mind no longer clings to identity. In Mahayana Buddhism, however, bodhisattvas choose to delay their final nirvana to help others reach enlightenment. Their compassion becomes a bridge, reminding us that liberation is not just a personal journey, but one that can uplift others as well. Ultimately, nirvana isn't about escaping life. It's about understanding it so deeply that suffering no longer has power over us. It's about learning to let go, not out of loss, but out of wisdom. And that wisdom allows us to experience life with clarity, compassion, and peace. So, what does all this mean for us today? It means we can start walking the path to Nirvana right now, even in the midst of our busy, modern lives. Practicing mindfulness, cultivating kindness, and learning to let go of attachments can bring glimpses of the peace Nirvana offers. And each step we take brings us closer to that ultimate freedom. In the next section, we'll reflect on the practical steps we can take to apply these teachings to our daily lives. Stay tuned for insights into how we can bring mindfulness, kindness, and awareness into our everyday experiences. As we come to the end of this exploration, one thing becomes clear. Buddhism doesn't view death as something to be feared. Instead, it teaches us that death is a natural part of existence, a transition rather than a final end. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that we have the power to influence what comes next through our thoughts, actions, and intentions. The concept of karma highlights that every decision we make matters, not because of some cosmic judgment, but because we're constantly shaping our future. Whether it's through acts of kindness, mindfulness, or compassion, we are planting seeds that will determine not only this life but also what may follow. Buddhism also challenges us to reconsider the idea of the self. By understanding that our identity is fluid and ever-changing, we can begin to let go of attachments that lead to suffering. This realization can help us live with more freedom and less fear, embracing impermanence rather than resisting it. And what about the ultimate goal, Nirvana? While it may seem like a distant ideal, Buddhism encourages us to see it as a journey rather than a destination. Each step we take, whether it's practicing mindfulness, meditating, or showing compassion, moves us closer to that state of inner peace and freedom. The stories of rebirth and past life memories give us glimpses into the continuity of consciousness, reminding us that our actions ripple far beyond what we can immediately see. At the same time, the teachings on Nirvana remind us that freedom from suffering is possible, not by escaping life, but by deeply understanding it. So, what can we take away from all of this? Perhaps the most powerful lesson is that we don't need to wait until death to start transforming our lives. The path begins here and now. Whether we're reflecting on our actions, letting go of harmful habits, or simply taking a moment to breathe and be present, we're already walking the path toward greater peace and understanding. As the Buddha once said, "No one saves us but ourselves. No one can, and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path." This reminds us that the journey is in our hands, and every step we take brings us closer to clarity, compassion, and ultimately, freedom. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of life, death, and what lies beyond. If this video has resonated with you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're interested in learning more about Buddhist teachings and practices, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more insights. Until next time, take care and walk the path with wisdom and peace.